welcome. We're really happy that you could all join us today. We're back together after a lunch break for the first history session of the Symposium on Disability Cultural Centers in Higher Education. Okay, so again, welcome. We are here together to hear from two different universities, kind of the first few universities that had a disability cultural center. So we have Aysha Razzaque from the University of Minnesota. We have Liat Ben-Moshe, who was a graduate student at Syracuse University. And we have Diane Wiener, who's the first director at Syracuse. So I'm gonna just ask each person to introduce themselves before sharing kind of the story of the founding of their DCC and its development. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Aysha.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Aysha. I go by she, her pronouns. And I was the former president of the Disabled Student Cultural Center at the University of Minnesota. And since I graduated, I now became an alumni advisor. I identify as disabled, specifically autistic and ADHD. For a visual description, I am 22 years old, an Asian woman with black hair, wearing a Nirvana t-shirt, and I have black glasses. I'm currently located in Chicago also because I was here for a trip. I'm currently sitting in Starbucks, so behind me are just like the lights, cash register, the menu, and there might be some people kind of milling back and forth.
Aysha, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're getting some messages in the chat that there's a little bit of feedback when you're speaking.
Oh yeah, that's maybe my microphone. I'm using my AirPod.
Do you think, I don't know if there's any adjustment that could be made, but maybe you want to try again?
I don't know. I don't know because I'm currently sitting in a coffee shop with my phone and AirPods.
Oh, okay. How about this? I will try to track the captions and then I'll let you know if the captions are really dropping your audio to the point that they can't follow it.
All right. When did they start dropping?
People are more commenting on an echo than the captions.
Okay.
Working.
Okay, how do I don't have my computer on me right now. I'm on my iPhone.
So that's fine. Thank you for letting us know, Aysha. If you want to continue, I will watch the captions, and then if anyone is having trouble with the echo, I'm trying to think. Does anybody have any? Oh, the background noise might be there.
Yeah, there's some background music.
Okay, no, that's okay. If I don't know if there's a more quiet corner of the Starbucks, but otherwise I think we can just try to follow the caption.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think so. But yeah, hopefully tomorrow will be better because I'll be back home.
Yeah, why don't you just keep going? I'm sorry for the interruption, but thank you for letting us figure this out.
Yeah, I'm not in Kaufman Union right now. I'm in Chicago. Literally just a random Starbucks in Chicago. Yeah, so I basically just go into the history of the DSCC at the UMN. All right, so the University of Minnesota's Disabled Student Cultural Center is actually the first one that was founded in the nation. It was established in 1990, the same year that the ADA was passed. And historically, we've been part of this larger group of cultural centers comprising of different racial, religious, gender, and sexuality related identities at the University of Minnesota. So it's part of this greater cultural center climate. And we've always had a presence in our student union at Kaufman. Essentially the whole time at the University of Minnesota, our main goal has been to not just bring awareness to accessibility, but actually play an active role in facilitating accessibility for students and staff alike on campus. So we've always been a touch point for people looking for resources or connections, and we've worked closely with our Disability Resource Center and Critical Disability Studies graduate department. And yeah, in recent history, especially, we've encountered quite a few First Amendment related lawsuits. They often targeted all of the cultural centers as a whole rather than the DSCC in particular. But over time, we've learned to contend with them by making those connections and working with the University of Minnesota's legal department, their student unions and activities, basically working with the administration. However, as long as we've been around, we've always been a registered student organization. So that means legally we are independent from the University of Minnesota. So that gives us the freedom to express views and opinions that may be contradictory to the institution in which we reside in. Yeah, and I've been the president for the last year and a half before graduating, and then I've been with the DSCC all 4 years. And I think the only other recent piece of history that I have is how we were always a small group, and that actually helped us when we had to move things virtually with the pandemic. It was easier to have these small group Zoom meetings and events that helped keep us afloat. And now we're back in person and slowly kicking things back into gear with in-person or hybrid events. And yeah.
Thank you, Aysha. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think your disability student culture or disabled students cultural center is such an interesting example, not just because it goes back so far, but because of its like continued and unique, I would say, compared to other disability cultural centers, relationship to the university, which is something that you just touched on, the fact that you're a student organization technically. And yeah, so thank you so much for that background, for some of that recent history. And I think what we can do now is turn it over to Liat to share a little bit about Syracuse's story. And so Liat, back to you, or over to you.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Aysha, and thanks for everybody who's joining. It's really gratifying to see so many people on the symposium. I think we were hoping for a lot of people, but I feel like there is a huge interest currently in disability cultural centers. So as somebody who was there in the beginning, I don't think this is something that it's something that we were hoping for, but I don't think it's something we necessarily built on. So thanks for making this space, Margaret, and Javin and everybody that organized this session. So I'm in Chicago. It's the same place as Margaret, same land acknowledgement, and for self-description, I'm white, a little bit tanned today woman, so less pale than usual, in femi, but very, very short hair that has some gray in it. I'm wearing makeup, I'm wearing glasses, and a shirt that has stripes. And behind me is a blurred background, so you can't see all my crap. And I'm also, if you were to see me in person without the blurred background, you would see that I'm disabled, visibly so, but you can see that on Zoom. And my relationship to DCCs is that I was a part of the kind of organizing structure and committee, both informally and formally, that created the Disability Cultural Center at Syracuse. So for the next about 15 minutes or so, that's the journey I'm gonna take you on, is the formation of that center. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit, just to let you know what I'll be saying. It's about the when, the what, the how, and the where of DCCs in relation to the one at Syracuse. So I want to start with the when. So our journey to create the DCCC, and I'll keep saying DCCC to refer to Disability Cultural Center at Syracuse, was really long. So for those of you who are joining who might be students or thinking of establishing one, and you're really upset by the kind of rate that the university is going, the pace, university go in like glacial pace. I once was that student who was like, why not next year? And 10 years later, something, happened. And it is really frustrating when you are a student because you're not there for 10 years. I mean, I don't recommend it. But usually you're not. And so I just wanted to kind of say that up front because it does take a really long time. And it also takes a lot of collective organizing, which I'll share in a moment. And so the DCCC at Syracuse started from the collective push of our student organization that was called the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee, or BCCC. Again, Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee. And so the BCCC was founded in 2001 at Syracuse. I came a few months later to the US and to Syracuse. I came in 2002. So I was part of kind of the formation of the BCCC. And I'm going to put a link to some of the history, and I know that Diane is going to provide more links a little bit later. But for people who want to follow along about the where, this is a little bit about the history of the BCCC. So it was founded in 2001, and it was founded by mostly graduate students who came to Syracuse to study disability studies. So we already were at least a little bit politicized about disability, and I think this is very important to know. So we knew we wanted to study disability studies, so we knew what disability studies was a little bit. We were very young, but we knew that disability is an identity and a culture and a history. I don't know that we knew much more than that, but many of us had disabilities. And so we were already started as a political group of students, and we started very adversarially. So we started because we protested the Disability Service Office, the Office of Disability Services at Syracuse. So that, I think, is very important information for the how and where of the DCCC in Syracuse. because one model of DCCs nationally has been the Minnesota model, which Aysha just described, which is a model that's of student organization that's connected to disability services, meaning it's in some sort of either collaboration with or gets funding from or is connected to the disability services on that campus. And there's other examples of that that you'll learn about in the next 2 hours following our session. But the other model, which is where we ended up going, is the model that's completely separate from the disability services. And for us, that was just a necessity because we were very adversarial to the Office of Disability Services at Syracuse, because we didn't feel it provided even the bare minimum of accommodation that it needed to provide, let alone any kind of political or cultural understanding of disability, which one might say, you know, maybe it's not its mandate, but surely the mandate is at least to provide accommodation, and it did not. So the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee, the name comes from the fact that we felt that we need to move beyond compliance. So beyond kind of the letter of the law, the disability is not about lawsuits, and it's not about medical condition, and it's not about, but that we need to celebrate the culture that is disability. And so you can see already, even that we didn't know what a cultural center was, we already had this kind of vision as students early on that that's what we want to accomplish, is celebration of culture of disability. And so as a student group, the BCCC did a lot of events, what today we might call cultural events. We did film series, we did, you know, guest talks, we did presentations all over campus. We went and presented as students in the TA orientation, the teaching assistant orientation. We wrote a book called Building Pedagogical Curb Cuts that I know Diane will reference later. And that book also is available for free online. And we did a lot of these kind of things, and we did it as students, meaning without any funding and without a lot of support except for faculty support. Because we were all disability studies students, and this is also really important, that it's not an accident that most DCCs are in university that have disability studies programs. We did have the support of the faculty there, but not of the administration, at least not at first. So let me transition now to the second part of my presentation, which is how did the DCCC come about? And so after a few years, after the BCCC was formed, we formed a working group with the administration. So first we were very adversarial, protest, everybody knew about us on campus, and they knew about us not because they liked us, but because we were troublemakers. But one of the things that we did was to create this working group. And out of that, we did things like kind of, you know, small group discussions. And we started these visioning sessions of what do we want to see at Syracuse, not what we don't, which is lack of access, lack of good hiring practices of staff who are disabled or faculty who are disabled and so on. So not just what we don't want, but what do we want? Like if we had all the money and all the support. And a cultural center was one of the things that repeatedly people pointed to. Various stakeholders, undergrads, grad students, people in the working group. And so that became kind of our lightning rod for the next few years, is how do we make that happen, right? Like how do we get from a visioning session to a physical funded structure that's a disability cultural center? And that part took, I would say about 5 years. And so that's the kind of when aspect. Then we started to think about the where, right? So if we had such a cultural center, under what purview would it be? Who will fund it? How would it be funded? Where would it sit on campus? And so we knew that one of the things we wanted is, like Aysha was pointing out, in regards to Minnesota, we wanted it to be with the other cultural centers, all the religious, religious kind of understanding, the other ethnic centers, the other, the LGBTQ center, and so on. Wherever things are, that's where we wanted DCC to be. I have to say that took another probably 10 years. Diane can correct me, but I think it just happened over the pandemic that the DCC at Syracuse finally moved into the kind of renovated space where all or most of the centers actually reside. But that was the vision. So originally the DCCC in Syracuse was housed where the disability studies program is, because it made the most logical sense. This is where we were as people. This is literally where we hung out. This is where disabled people hung out. This is where people kind of dropped into. So it was kind of natural for it to be there on a temporary basis until we can be housed with the majority of the other centers in a centralized location. And the last thing is the how in terms of models. So I already said that we were in an adversarial relationship to the Disability Service Center. Then came a new director, we became less adversary, but we knew that we wanted to be under student affairs, meaning that the entity that funded us needed to be the same entity that funded the Gay and Lesbian Cultural Center, the Women Center, and so on and so on. Multicultural Center, International Student Center, and so on. And so one of the things that we did was we kind of toured other formations of DCCCs. At that point, there was only the Minnesota as like an existing entity, but then there was also, kind of smaller formations like in Berkeley and so on. So I flew to these various places, met with various stakeholders and kind of heard what are the pros and cons of each model. I brought that back to Syracuse. We created again forums and meetings, and out of that came the vision that ended up being the Disability Cultural Center at Syracuse. So to conclude, it was a very long journey, and a lot of it was, quite frankly, pretty adversarial, but some of it wasn't. We found allies along the way, and by we, I mean the BCCC, also a lot of other students. Along the way came also an undergraduate student organization that wasn't in existence when we started. So it was really the collective wisdom and organization of students who pushed for the center to happen, and then finding allies, which are administrators, finding allies, which are faculty beyond the disability studies program, who really came together. And with us pushing for that for a number of years, came kind of a perfect storm of various things that allowed us to push for a full-time director, which ended up being Diane. So I look forward to any questions that people have. And again, I'm really, really delighted that so many people are here. And it means to me that people want to push for more disability cultural centers, and that disability culture is spreading. So that's all great to know.
Thank you so much, Liat. This is Margaret speaking. Yes, what a wonderful note to end on. And so I just want to invite Diane, who's also here with us, to chime in. Diane, if you have a few, any words you want to add, and then we can open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, this is Diane speaking. I actually just got emotional. I wasn't expecting that. And that I should have known better, but I will put a few links in the chat, which I'll reference in a few minutes, as Liat mentioned. And I want to say good afternoon, everyone. I will read my introductory statement and my self-description on a different machine. And there may be trucks and motorcycles and cats and other beings in the background. So I'm honored and thrilled to be here. I want to thank you for inviting me and including me. I'm Diane Wiener. My pronouns are she or hers or they, them, theirs. The best pronoun for me is really Diane. I'm a genderqueer, middle-aged, white, Ashkenazi, Jewish person. I'm neuroqueer, I'm mad, I'm crip. And I have salt and pepper buzz cut situation growing out right now, although I'll probably buzz it again. And I'm wearing green framed glasses. I'm wearing a light blue historical t-shirt, which has a logo of a jar, maybe a pill bottle, from the 40th anniversary of the Center on Human Policy at Syracuse University. And the 40th anniversary of the Center on Human Policy was in 2011. For people accessing the content visually, I'll pull up my shirt so you can access it that way, and I will describe it. It's a blue t-shirt with this logo. The logo reads, label jars, ... not people, in a lowercase black sans serif font. I'm also wearing a dragonfly pendant around my neck in honor and gratitude for my beloved Aunt Joan, who was my hero. And I'm joining you today in respectful, accountable, and shared stewardship. I'm seated in my home on unceded land of the Cayuga and Onondaga nations in Awaga, otherwise known as Owego, New York. And I'm sitting in front of a maroon wall with brightly colored various kinds and styles of artwork created by local and global artists, including members of my family and friendship circle. And from 2011 to 2018, October 17th, 2011 to December 31st, 2018, I was the first full-time director of a disability cultural center, and that was at Syracuse University. So the founding director. And I remained the lead editor of Word Gathering, a journal of disability poetry and literature, which is a disability cultural innovative space I'm glad to lead with my wonderful colleagues on the editorial team, and that's housed at SU. I no longer work full-time at Syracuse University, so this is all legacy content for Liat and me in many respects. So it's a really powerful question, and how do you talk about, years and years of experience? But the short answer to the long question is there isn't anything that we didn't have to figure out. The first link I was hoping someone could help share is a reference to a report that is the Task Force on Disability, Realizing the Vision of Inclusion, Access, and Full Participation from the Chancellor's Task Force at Syracuse University. If you scroll down a little bit, there's a date on this report that I want to make note of, September 2007. And this report was the first time in a formal way that the disabled students' activist efforts, as underscored so beautifully and helpfully by Liat, specifically the activism of the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee, was put into a textual form in the context of a relationship with the chancellor of the university. And so this has all kinds of sections in it. It's highly elaborate, and it has a section on physical accessibility, on communication, on technology and virtual assets and access, academic and programmatic opportunities, staff and faculty with disabilities and how to best serve those individuals effectively, students with disabilities, disabled students, and university life, with a whole list of recommendations. If you could unscreen share for a second, thanks so much for helping, Javin. And thanks again to Margaret and Javin and everyone involved in making this space possible. So honestly, the first time I read this report, I was hired more than 4 years after that report. And so between the fall of 2010 and the spring of 2011, when Liat was a graduate assistant, they led this Disability Cultural Center initiative and helped put together all these job descriptions and did a ton of work. And in many respects, were a not director, right? And so when the decision was made to create a center, every single thing had to be figured out based on all these powerful, meaningful, amazing recommendations, including some things that some of the administrators thought were pie in the sky, but I didn't. And Liat and the students certainly didn't. So we worked to do everything that had to be done. You know, at first we were in the famous Hoople building. You know, there are still bricks from the Hoople building, which was demolished years later. And the Hoople building was the famous housing for the Disability Studies program. And I want to dedicate my remarks this afternoon to Professor Stephen Taylor, who was beloved by thousands of people and certainly knew Liat and mentored Liat very well, I know. And Steve was a dear colleague and friend of mine. And I think if he had a consciousness today and knew that there was a symposium on disability cultural centers being established all over the planet, he would be very happy, in my view. So Arlene Cantor and Steve Taylor and a whole bunch of other faculty and staff were definitely on board, but I agree 300% with Liat that it was the students who really were behind the efficacy of this coming to fruition. So everything, the space, how to set up the space, what kind of furniture, the business card, making sure the Braille was positioned effectively by conferring with people who were primarily Braille users, making sure that the door, and people used to joke with me that the door should have its own memoir. You know, how was the door going to open? How we were going to time the door? How were people going to have multiple means of accessing digital content, event management, collaboration with the faculty, consulting on the national and global scale, being in company, making spaces where the students had primacy all the time, making sure it wasn't a sea of whiteness, making sure it wasn't some cisgendered bullshit, pardon my language, making sure that there wasn't a heteronormative vibe, that people really thought about it as an intersectional space, although it wasn't necessarily the language people used all the time at that time. And so that all took a while, and the center was opened, and there was a ribbon cutting ceremony with the chancellor, and that orange ribbon is still present in my life. And we were the first organizational context for all of this to unfold. I mean, it was really remarkable. I still have blueprints from our colleagues, you know, in terms of what was going to happen. And years later, the students being involved all along the way, there was an effort to move the cultural center to the student center. And then it was put in a location at the student center, and then moved again more recently. So it's part of an intercultural collective with the Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Queer Resource Center, and is also in solidarity with the International Center, but they have their own building by the library on campus. There is also the La Casita Cultural Center, and there are other very complex and important identity-based and religious and spiritually based and ethnic and cultural spaces and locations around campus, academic programs, and administrative units that work in a collaborative way with the Disability Cultural Center, which is almost 11 years old, which is amazing. I guess a couple of other quick remarks in the interest of time I would add is that there wasn't really anyone to talk about this with besides the people I already knew, including Liat and Wendy Harbour, goddess bless her, and a number of other people who were, again, foundational in these trips that Liat mentioned. Tom Wolfe, who was the first person to really be behind this, who was then senior vice president of what was then called Student Affairs, which has changed names numbers of times. And all of these people worked in solidarity. So the relationship, I think, didn't completely stop being adversarial, but there was a different kind of activist involvement. And so making all that happen, I think, was never about any one person. It was always a collective action. And I was never going to be some suit, right? Which has now been recorded. There you go. So nobody expected that of me. and I was very out about my disability identities. And I think that the history of it really amazes me, because the students who formed the Disability Student Union in partnership with the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee initially were called the Undergraduate Disability Initiative. We were concerned that sounded like UTI and that was kind of an icky, idiomatic parallel. So people didn't want to say UDI. And also there didn't want to be confusion that it was the Universal Design Initiative. So Eddie Zaremba and a whole bunch of other people were part of creating that organization, and I was their first advisor. And I think that someday I hope someone really does write a completely accessible, multi-formatted, riveting tale about the history of DCCs around the world. And I think the archival content of this is very important. So, you know, I can give more specific examples of things, but I don't want to talk longer than I already have. And thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be with you all.
This is Margaret speaking. Thank you, Diane, and thank you, everyone. I think this is exactly what we were hoping the histories would be. It's just like practically, truly, actually, what's involved, like what do we have to think about? And Liat, I really appreciate what you were saying about the when. And I think it connects with what everyone's been talking about in terms of needing to connect with people to make that happen over longer scales of time. Oh, I just want to read what Liat put in the chat. And then
yes, and I can add one more quick thing apropos of that. I'm really happy you mentioned Jane. Jane Gershaw was a phenomenal human being and was an elder when I met her a number of years ago, and she has more recently passed away into the perhaps next incarnation. I don't know what her belief systems were, but she also incredibly was, speaking of 2 or 3, not even 6 degrees of separation, actually went to school with people in my family, which I found out from her years after we knew each other. So that was wild. And thank you to Liat and to everyone, especially Jane, for producing the documents that we were referencing earlier. In the link that I didn't screen share, but is in the chat, there's a reference to the building pedagogical curb cuts. Liat also put in the chat a link to accessing that if anybody wants to get a copy of that. And in the link that I'm also not screen sharing right now, although thank you for helping with everything, Javin, there's a reference to other university resources, including how to work effectively with PowerPoints and a number of other things that Liat and other leaders of the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee helped create. And I do have one other quick little anecdote, if it's all right to do that, Professor Fink.
That's okay. Yeah, make it, if you don't mind, one more
Fast.
quick anecdote, and then we can open it up for Q&A.
Yes. So Michael Schwartz, who was the fomenter of the Disability Rights Clinic in the College of Law, was one of the people who was involved with the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee when he was a student. And I think that's another powerful example of the legacies here and the history here. And I think it's important to mention Michael in particular because he's one of the few out culturally deaf professors in the law world and beyond. And he was in the BCCC. And so that's another part of that legacy. And so I just wanted to mention him in the context of our comments and the histories being recorded today. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, there's so many people that we want to recognize and name. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Okay, so without further ado, we have about 15 minutes remaining. And what we're going to do for a Q&A is we now have the chat open, so you can send a question that way if you'd like to. You can also use the raise hand function. And Javin, who's on the call, will be reading out from the chat, and I will be calling on people whose hands are raised. So yeah, if you all have any questions or comments, go for it. Jevin, do you want to read that one in the chat and then I'll call on the people with their hands raised?
Sure. So for the question in the chat from UC Access Now, do you find that among all the things that need changing in higher ed for disabled folks, that concentrating on winning a DCC helps working for those other gains?
Margaret, for I wonder if and Jevin, for kind of thinking purposes, processing, maybe you can have a few questions, maybe 2 or 3, and then we can answer kind of collectively.
This is Margaret. Do you mean like we read that and then we take a couple more questions and then continue?
Yes.
Okay, we can do that. We have 2 more people with their hands raised. So we have this question about whether winning a DCC helps with other activist initiatives. And then I'll call on Kara. Would you like to ask a question? So Kara, I see that you're unmuted, but I'm not getting audio.
This is Kara. Can you hear me now? Thank you. This is Kara. I'm an incoming PhD student at the University of Michigan. And one of the barriers that's been constructed for us in this organizing is that administration will often say that sort of our demands aren't validly backed because we don't have this sort of mass of undergraduates that are organized around the work. And I'm sure many of us here are familiar with those challenges and the reasons why undergraduates are immediately involved. So I'm wondering if in all of your experiences, if you've come up against that, and then also relatedly thinking about how do you do this kind of placemaking organizing when we're still in the middle of the pandemic and sort of sustaining power building and mobilizing for it in this climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara. I'm going to try to recap what you asked in the chat, but Liz, would you like to ask a question and then we can turn it over for some answers?
Yeah, hi, this is Liz. My question was around media, relationship and working with the media as you created and the DCC was established. So I guess just any tips around working with the media. And one of the oldest archival articles is actually Aysha from when the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Cultural Center was established, and it's actually from the New York Times, and which I think is amazing that somehow it got picked up by the New York Times. So my question is around media, working with the media.
So I guess again, like you said, the UMN's DSCC is kind of in a unique position in that we were featured in places like the New York Times because we were established when, access became this mainstream hot topic with the passing of the ADA. In my experience, working with the media has always been a little finicky. Generally, the journalists, reporters, the people who are publishing articles about us, they're fairly easy to work with, but there are a lot of legal things you have to navigate, such as anonymizing people's names, talking about certain situations or current events. I find that the easiest media groups to work with have always been like on-campus student-run media groups, such as school newspapers, because at the U of M at least, they also operate independently of the university, meaning that, again, they can publish things that contradict what the university believes, and that allows us more freedom to reach students even if the university might not approve of it. And yeah, I also kind of want to point out that social media especially has been really helpful for the DSCC at the U of M, because our board members are all students, many of whom are undergraduates, mostly undergraduates actually, and using social media has always been quicker and easier in terms of just making our presence known. And we've always made sure that our presence is seen not just on campus, but also in cyberspace.
So thank you for those questions, and a really thoughtful connection also between the questions. So I'm going to try to kind of answer combined. So regarding the question about is winning a DCCC helps working on other gains, I think it's connected to another kind of question comment from Nora in the chat, which I can also read about. How do you integrate DCCCs with other cultural centers, because everybody is very separated by unique identities? And so I think that for us, when we kind of fought for the DCC, the answer to those questions were exactly that's what we wanted to see happen, is that the formation of a disability cultural center is a political goal. We understood disability as a political, identity and formation. And this is also the answer about the undergrad question, because, for a lot of us, when we were 18, I don't think we were politicized by very much, unless we grew up in a very political household. And I don't mean political as in, by the way, like party or something like red or blue or something. But I mean, political in terms of identities and in terms of struggle and in terms of resistance. And so, and I think for those of us who are disabled, it's not like we're all connected to other disabled people or even know that we have a history, or then, kind of, we're not politicized like in those ways, right? That we're connected to like histories of resistance and all of that. And so I think that is also why a lot of disability cultural centers form on fertile grounds, meaning either in places that have disability studies programs or have a formation of a lot of disabled people that are politicized and then politicize others, or are physically near a place like that. So I think that that's like really important to know. So it's not like a one size fits all thing. Like everything that you are all asking has to be answered in your local kind of formation. But I think that in general, I'm going to use a very big generalization here. People who are undergrads are younger in general. And when people are younger, they are not yet politicized in the same way that other people are. So that is often why not a lot of undergrads are as political as in their disability identity, and even in terms of other, are not as perhaps kind of like radical in their feminism or in their queerness, or, a lot of other stuff. And the goal of a disability cultural center, that's why it's kind of the chicken and the egg, is to do that, is to politicize people, right? Is to be like, hey, do you know that a learning disability is not just what you experience like on the page or with your teacher? It's also something that has a long history of oppression and also a long history of resistance, and that you can be in solidarity with other people who have the category of disability. And disability is also something that's very oppressive, but also something to maybe be prideful. Like, hey, did you know that there's disability art and culture, and we can connect you to that? And that is what a DCCC does. So it is a chicken and the egg, right? Like, you can't push for something unless you have the people that already are doing the pushing. One of the things that we did, because we were a formation of people, again, it's not a one size fits all. I'm just telling you my story. Because we were a formation of, mostly older graduate students, older than undergrads, is that we did things like the film series. And we just, brought these disability films. Some of them we found very questionable and ridiculous. Comedies by the Furley brothers and all of that. But undergrads really loved it. We brought in somebody, Jennifer from Circus Amok, who literally what she does is that she swallows fire. And she's a bearded lady, self-described, but Circus Amok is a political circus. And so we brought in undergrads with these kind of, look, it's fire and they're eating fire. But then we politicize them about like capitalism or, whatever. So in the case of Circus Amok, and feminism and Marxism and, whatever. And so this is how we kind of played that game. The other thing we did is Syracuse is a very, they love their sports. I didn't know nothing about sports, but I knew that people on campus love sports. And so we created an event called Orange Ability, and it still exists today. And anyway, Dan can talk more about that if she wants, but it's just ways to, appeal to undergrads and then trying to politicize them, finding them where they're at and trying to politicize them. So, and that was also our answer to a lot of the intersectionality, then I'll shut up, is that you in some ways have to meet people where they're at, but you really have to insist, like Diane was saying, that it's not going to be this kind of, this is a center for disabled people. This is a center for people of color, as if there's no people of color who are disabled or something like that. That is so ridiculous. That didn't even kind of factor into people's planning sometimes, that we are in the intersections, like that's where we live. And it's really important in the planning of the DCC to make sure that everybody is on that page. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case always for us. But, when the center was brought to fruition, it was important for us to push for that.
Thank you, everyone. All these powerful comments. I'm just try to synthesize a couple of my very nonlinear thoughts. I often joke that I pass as linear as an accommodation for other people. So this is Diane again. And I think there's a question posed here about encouraging the development of a disability studies program from the presence of a disability cultural center. I think that's a great question as well. And one of the things I'll say very briefly is that this idea that events are either cultural or political is already, to me, a kind of absurd notion. I think that Liat is debunking that. And so people coming together to talk about disability, athletic experience and wisdom and expertise and the intensity of playing wheelchair rugby, it's not a simulation activity. It's a totally separate sport than the basketball and rugby and other sports and hockey and power soccer played by folks who have whole different identities than those who are disabled. So, I mean, I suck at basketball, but I really suck at wheelchair basketball. So I think that's been recorded too. So I think if you talk about sports and athleticism and you're connecting that with disability, you're already undermining what many, many people think disability is about. And so then there's a conversation that can unfold, including with the media. What does disability mean to you? What does it mean to you to live in a world where disability is an experience of empowerment, not just an experience for so many people of, hiding and shame and pity and an affront to experience because of people's ableism. And so I think talking with people about that is a powerful thing to do and is a political thing to do, whether they're woke or not, quote unquote. And I'll pause there because we don't have a lot of time, I know, if any. So yeah.
This is Margaret. We are out of time, but wow, like, thank you all. You have really crammed a lot of wisdom into a short period of time. Yeah, I'm really thankful. And thank you everyone for these amazing questions in the chat. I think Diane commented in a previous panel that we really need a couple more hours for all of the great questions that people are bringing. We do have a reverse panel. It's on Saturday night. I don't know if that's going to be the most appealing time for everyone, but if you want to bring your questions, I hope you will. Okay, everyone, thank you. We are going to reconvene in about half an hour for another history panel, this time University of Arizona and UIC. So we'll be back here in the main Zoom. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Liat. Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Aysha.
Thanks, everyone.